The rain was coming down in sheets that November night, the kind of cold, relentless downpour that chills you straight to the bone. It was 11 o'clock, far too late for a woman to be standing on a sidewalk with 3 crying toddlers. But there Maya stood, watching as suitcases landed on the wet pavement with heavy thuds. Her mother-in-law, Dorothy, stood in the doorway of the house Maya had called home for 5 years, her face twisted with something between triumph and disgust. "You and those brats are nothing without this family," Dorothy spat, throwing the last bag onto the lawn. "You have nowhere to go, no money, nothing. Good luck surviving out there." Behind Dorothy, Maya could see her husband James, standing with his arms crossed, his expression cold and detached. And there, smirking behind him like she'd already won some kind of prize, was Brittany, the girlfriend, the other woman, the reason Maya's marriage had crumbled into dust. The extended family crowded in the hallway and at the windows. James's siblings, his aunt and uncle, even some cousins. About 15 people total, and not one of them had spoken up for her. Some were even recording on their phones, documenting her humiliation as if it were entertainment. 3-year-old Emma clung to Maya's leg, sobbing. Olivia was wailing in her arms, and little Noah stood frozen on the sidewalk, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. The triplets didn't understand why Daddy wasn't helping, why Grandma Dorothy was so angry, why they were leaving their home in the middle of the night in the rain. Maya looked at the house one more time. The house she'd helped pay for, though James didn't know that. The house she'd turned into a home, cooking meals, creating memories, believing she was building a life. Now she was being thrown out like garbage, and her children were being used as pawns in a game she'd never wanted to play. She loaded the crying children into her old minivan, buckling each one with shaking hands. Her hair was plastered to her face, her clothes soaked through. She could hear Dorothy still shouting from the doorway, hear James's siblings laughing about something, hear the casual cruelty of people who thought they'd won. As Maya closed the van door, she looked back one more time. James stood there in the dry warmth of the doorway, Brittany tucked under his arm, and he mouthed something at her. "You're nothing without us." Maya felt something shift inside her, something cold and clear and final. She reached into her purse and pulled out a phone. Not the regular phone James knew about. The other one. The one connected to a life he'd never known existed. She climbed into the driver's seat, her children still crying in the back, and dialed a number she hadn't called in 5 years. A man answered on the second ring. His voice was deep, cultured, concerned. "Maya." "Hello, Father," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tears on her face. "It's time. I'm coming home." There was a pause. Then Richard Blackwell's voice came through with absolute certainty. "I've been waiting for this call. Where are you?" "About to leave the biggest mistake of my life. I'll have the team ready. Come home, sweetheart. Come home." Maya started the engine, looked at her babies in the rearview mirror, and whispered, "Mommy's going to show them what we're really made of." Then she drove away into the rainy night, leaving behind a family that thought they destroyed her, not knowing they just made the biggest mistake of their lives. But to understand how it all came to this, to truly grasp the magnitude of what James and his family had just done, we need to go back. Back 5 years, to when Maya was a different person living a different life. Or rather, pretending to live a different life. 5 years earlier, Maya was 24 years old, fresh out of college with a degree in business and finance. She'd meet James at a small coffee shop near the university, one of those chance encounters that feels like fate. He was charming, ambitious, working as a marketing executive at a mid-sized firm. She was working as what she called a freelance consultant, which was vague enough that most people didn't ask questions. They'd hit it off immediately. James was attentive, romantic, everything Maya thought she wanted. And crucially, he didn't know who she really was. He didn't know that Maya wasn't just some regular girl trying to make it in the world. He didn't know that her full name was Maya Blackwell, only daughter of Richard Blackwell, one of the most successful real estate moguls in the country. He didn't know that her father's net worth was estimated at $4.8 billion. He didn't know that Maya was the sole heiress to an empire. And Maya? She wanted to keep it that way. You see, Maya had grown up watching relationships form and crumble around money. She'd seen people befriend her only to get close to her father's wealth. She'd dated men who were more interested in her last name than in her. She'd watched her father's friends marry for money, divorce for money, destroy each other over money. And she'd made a decision when she left for college. She would live a normal life. She would find someone who loved her for her, not for her bank account. So Maya created a modest persona. She rented a small apartment, drove a regular car, wore normal clothes from normal stores. Her freelance consulting was actually her managing an entire division of her father's company remotely. But James didn't need to know that. She was making $850,000 a year, but she lived like she made $50,000. She had a trust fund worth $50 million sitting untouched in an account. She owned properties, had investment portfolios, had access to wealth most people couldn't imagine. But James knew none of this. And Maya liked it that way. She was testing him, though she wouldn't have admitted it at the time. She was seeing if he could love regular Maya. Average Maya. Maya without the billions. After 6 months of dating, James proposed. It was sweet, romantic, everything she'd hoped for. Her father had been cautious. "Are you sure about this, sweetheart?" Richard had asked. "Have you told him the truth?" "Not yet," Maya had admitted. "But I will. Once we're married and stable, once I know it's real, I'll tell him everything." Richard had studied his daughter's face. "When you find real love, I'll support you. But make sure it's real." The wedding was small and modest, entirely Maya's choice. She wanted to see how James and his family would react to a bride with no apparent wealth. And react they did. Dorothy, James's mother, had made snide comments throughout the entire planning process. "Such a cheap dress. No dowry. What exactly does her family bring to this marriage?" James's siblings had been condescending. His extended family had whispered behind their hands. But James had defended her. "First, I love her," he'd told his mother. "That's what matters." And Maya had believed him. She'd believed that once they were stable, once they'd built a life together, she could reveal the truth and it would be a wonderful surprise. "Guess what, honey? We never have to worry about money again." Except life had other plans. A year into the marriage, Maya discovered she was pregnant. Not just pregnant. Pregnant with triplets. 3 babies. Emma, Olivia, and Noah. The ultrasound technician had looked at the screen and said, "Well, I hope you're ready for an adventure." James had been excited at first, then overwhelmed, then increasingly stressed. 3 babies, he'd said, running his hands through his hair. How are we going to afford 3 babies? And that's when his family's poison really started to seep in. Dorothy had descended on them like a dark cloud. 3 babies? How will you manage? She doesn't even work full-time. Of course, Maya did work full-time. She was managing a billion-dollar division of her father's company from her laptop, but she couldn't tell them that without revealing everything. James's sister Rebecca had been brutal. "She trapped you. 3 babies means 3 times the expense. You're going to be supporting her forever." Maya had worked throughout her pregnancy, secretly contributing more than half of their household expenses. She'd paid most of the down payment on their house through careful transfers that James thought were from savings. She'd covered utilities, groceries, baby expenses, all while letting James believe he was the provider. She'd planned to tell him the truth after the babies were born, after things settled down. But things never settled down. The triplets arrived healthy but demanding. 3 infants crying at different times, needing different things, creating beautiful chaos. Maya was exhausted, working her remote job during nap times, managing conference calls with a baby on her hip, closing million-dollar deals while sterilizing bottles. She was still making nearly $1 million a year, still secretly paying most of their bills, still waiting for the right moment to tell James the truth. But James was changing. He was working longer hours, coming home more stressed, listening more to his mother's complaints. Dorothy had moved in to help, but her help consisted mainly of criticism. "In my day, women kept spotless houses. These children are so poorly dressed. James deserves better than this struggle." The family dinners became torture sessions. Rebecca would talk about her successful husband. James's brother Tom would make comments about James being basically a single father with a roommate. The extended family would exchange knowing looks. And slowly, James stopped defending Maya. He started agreeing with them. "Why can't you contribute more financially?" he'd ask. "Other wives have careers and manage kids," he'd say. "You're always tired. We never have fun anymore." Maya bit her tongue. She was managing 3 toddlers and a billion-dollar company division. But she couldn't tell him that. Not when things were this fragile. Not when she was starting to see a side of James she'd never noticed before. Then Brittany entered the picture. A coworker of James's, 26 years old, ambitious, child-free, and according to James, so driven. He started mentioning her at dinner. "Brittany got another promotion. Brittany runs marathons. Brittany just got back from Paris." The comparisons were constant and cruel. Maya, exhausted from triplets, couldn't compete with Brittany's child-free, carefree lifestyle. And she shouldn't have had to. But James couldn't see that. The late nights started. The perfume on his clothes that wasn't hers. The secretive phone calls. Maya found text messages between James and Brittany. They weren't explicitly sexual, but they were intimate. "Can't wait to see you. She doesn't understand me like you do. You're so different from my wife." Maya could have confronted him then. Could have told him the truth about who she was, what she was worth, what she'd been contributing all along. But something stopped her. Maybe she wanted to see how far he'd go. Maybe she wanted to see if he'd remember on his own that he'd made vows, that he had 3 children, that his wife wasn't worthless just because she seemed ordinary. He didn't remember. He went further. James started pushing for complete financial control. "We should combine everything," he'd said. "I'll manage all the accounts. It'll be easier." Maya had created a decoy joint account with just enough to seem realistic, while keeping her real accounts hidden. James looked at that joint account, saw it was always low because he was spending on Brittany, and decided Maya was the problem. Things came to a head 3 weeks before that rainy November night. James had announced a family meeting. Maya thought it was for his birthday celebration the following week. She'd spent days preparing, cooking, caring for the triplets, trying to hold together a marriage that was already dead. But when James's family arrived that Saturday afternoon, about 15 people crowding into their living room, Maya realized this wasn't a birthday party. This was an ambush. James stood up in front of his entire family and began listing grievances like a prosecutor at trial. "Maya doesn't contribute financially. The house is always a mess. She's let herself go. I've been carrying this family for 4 years. His family chimed in like a Greek chorus of cruelty. "Dorothy, I've been saying this for years. Rebecca, I could never be so dependent. Tom, this is why you vet people before marriage, bro." Maya tried to defend herself, but she was talked over, dismissed, mocked. The triplets started crying from the tension. 3 little voices wailing in confusion. And then James dropped the bomb. "I think we need to separate," he'd said. "This isn't working." Maya had been shocked. "You're doing this here? In front of everyone?" "I wanted witnesses," James had said coldly. "So you can't manipulate the story later." Then Brittany had walked in. She'd been waiting in the garage. The whole thing had been staged. "Hi, Maya," Brittany had said with false sweetness. "James has told me so much about you. I'm sorry it didn't work out." But the worst was yet to come. Dorothy had stood up, her face stern. "James and I have discussed it. The children should stay here." Maya's blood had run cold. "Excuse me? You have no job, no income, no support system," James had said, as if reading from a script. "I have all of that. I'll get primary custody. You can have supervised visitation. My mother will help raise them properly. They deserve stability." Maya had looked around the room at all these people nodding in agreement, deciding her children's fate like it was a business transaction. And something inside her had finally snapped. Instead of screaming or crying or begging, Maya had gone ice cold. "So you've all decided this? All of you?" She'd looked each person in the eye. James gets the house, the kids, everything. And I get what? Thrown out. You get to start over, James had said with cruel satisfaction. Isn't that what you wanted? Independence. Dorothy had smiled. We'll give you until tonight to pack your things. Tonight? It's already 6 p.m., Maya had said. Brittany had offered with fake concern. I'll help you pack if you want. That's when Maya had gone upstairs and made the call that would change everything. But first she'd packed. She'd packed her clothes, her personal items, the children's essentials. She'd found the old photo of her father that she'd hidden away, the one from before she decided to live a normal life. She'd looked at it and remembered his words. When you need me, I'm here. She'd also packed something else. Documents she'd hidden in the back of her closet. Bank statements showing her real accounts. Investment portfolios. Property deeds in her name. Corporate papers showing her position at Blackwell Enterprises. Evidence of every penny she'd secretly contributed to the household. James had never known these documents existed. He'd never looked. He'd never asked. He'd never valued her enough to wonder if there was more to his wife than met the eye. And as she'd packed, she could hear the family downstairs. They were celebrating. Actually celebrating. Dorothy had ordered a cake. They were laughing, planning James and Brittany's fresh start, discussing how much better things would be without Maya dragging James down. Rebecca had called up the stairs. Hurry up. We want to go to bed. When Maya had finally come downstairs at 11 p.m. with her children and their hastily packed belongings, the family had treated it like a show. Some were recording on their phones. Tom had joked, "Guess she won't be at Thanksgiving." The aunt had yelled, "Good riddance." Dorothy had physically rushed her, throwing the last bag onto the lawn. The rain had started just as Maya was loading the children into the van. 3 crying toddlers, confused and scared, asking, "Why are we leaving? Where's Daddy? I don't want to go." And James had stood there in the dry doorway with Brittany under his arm and watched his wife struggle alone with their 3 crying children in the pouring rain. He'd watched suitcases get soaked. He'd watched his babies cry. And he'd done nothing except mouth those words, "You're nothing without us." That's when Maya had made the call. The call that would reveal everything. The call that would change everything. "Hello, Father. It's time. I'm coming home." The drive to Blackwell Manor took 40 minutes. By the time Maya pulled up to the gates, her children had cried themselves to sleep in their car seats. The gates opened automatically. Recognizing her vehicle from the security system her father had insisted on installing years ago, back when she'd first decided to live on her own. The estate sprawled across 50 acres of pristine property. The main house was a masterpiece of modern architecture mixed with classical elegance. Soft lights illuminated the circular driveway where a fountain stood at the center. And there, waiting at the entrance, was Richard Blackwell. He was in his early 60s, distinguished and powerful in the way that only truly successful people can be. But his face, as he watched his daughter's van pull up, showed only concern and love. Maya parked and sat for a moment, her hands still gripping the steering wheel. This was it. The life she'd left behind. The life she'd tried to prove she didn't need. The life that had been waiting for her all along. Richard opened her door. "My darling girl," he said softly. "Welcome home." Maya fell into her father's arms and finally let herself cry. Not the quiet tears she'd shed in the van, but real, body-shaking sobs. 5 years of pretending. 5 years of being undervalued. 5 years of hiding who she was. It all came pouring out. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "You were right. You were right about everything." "Shoo," Richard said, holding his daughter. "You're home now. You're safe. Everything's going to be all right." He looked into the van at his 3 grandchildren, seeing them in person for the first time. Emma, Olivia, and Noah. 3 beautiful children he'd only seen in photos Maya had secretly sent. "And these," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "are my grandchildren." Staff appeared as if from nowhere. Housekeepers, nannies in soft uniforms, security personnel. They gently unbuckled the sleeping children and carried them inside. Maya watched, still dazed, as her babies were taken to what was clearly a prepared nursery. "You knew I'd come back," Maya said. "I hoped you would," Richard replied. "I've had rooms ready for you and the children since the day they were born, just in case." Inside, the house was warm and welcoming. Maya's old bedroom had been maintained exactly as she'd left it, but adjoining it now was a beautiful nursery with 3 small beds, toys, everything children could need. Her babies were gently changed into clean pajamas and tucked into soft beds by professional nannies who moved with quiet efficiency. Richard led Maya to his study, a room filled with leather-bound books and the scent of old wood and expensive whiskey. He poured her a drink and sat across from her. "Tell me everything," he said, and Maya did. She told him about meeting James, about hiding her identity, about the wedding and the pregnancy and the slow deterioration of her marriage. She told him about Dorothy's cruelty and James's affair and the family meeting and the eviction. She told him everything, 5 years of secrets spilling out in one long confession. When she finished, Richard was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You were testing him." "Yes," Maya admitted. "And he failed spectacularly." "Yes." Richard leaned forward. "Maya, you are my daughter. You are brilliant, capable, and strong. You run the West Coast division of my company and do it better than anyone I could have hired. You've been making nearly $1 million a year while raising triplets and maintaining a household. You did all of that while pretending to be someone you're not." He paused. "Why did you keep pretending? Even after you knew he was cheating?" Maya thought about this. "I think I wanted to see how far it would go. I wanted to see if he'd remember on his own that I had value, that I was worthy of respect and love, even if I seemed ordinary." She looked at her father. "He never did." "No," Richard agreed. "He didn't. And now he's going to learn exactly what he threw away." Over the next 3 days, Richard's team moved with brutal efficiency. Private investigators were hired to dig into James's life. Forensic accountants began tracing every financial contribution Maya had made to the household. Top family law attorneys were brought in to review custody options. Security details were assigned to protect Maya and the children. Nannies were hired, wardrobes were updated, and Maya began the transformation back into the woman she'd always been underneath the modest disguise. The investigators' report came back quickly, and it was damning. James hadn't just been having an affair with Brittany for the past few months. It had been going on for 8 months. He'd taken her to expensive restaurants and hotels, all charged to credit cards that Maya's secret payments had been covering. But worse than that, James had a gambling problem. Online poker, sports betting. He owed over $127,000 to various creditors. The stable provider was actually a house of cards barely held together by Maya's hidden contributions. Dorothy's finances were equally disastrous. She was $89,000 in credit card debt, living far beyond her means, projecting an image of upper-middle-class stability that didn't exist. The investigators traced the mortgage payments on the house. 70% had come from Maya's accounts. The down payment had been 80% her money. Everything, from the utilities to the groceries to the children's expenses, had been primarily funded by Maya while James spent his salary on maintaining appearances and conducting his affair. "He married you thinking you were potential," Richard said, reviewing the reports. "He kicked you out when he thought you were worthless. And now he'll want you back for your money." "What do I do?" Maya asked. "What do you want to do?" Maya thought about her children sleeping upstairs in their safe, beautiful bedroom. She thought about the years she'd spent making herself small, trying to be enough for a man who would never see her value. She thought about standing in the rain watching her babies cry while James did nothing. "I want him to understand what nothing actually feels like," she said quietly. Richard smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a billionaire who'd built an empire and knew exactly how to destroy someone. "Then let's show him." On the 4th day after the eviction, James received registered mail. Inside was a packet of divorce papers, but not just any divorce papers. These came from Blackwell and Associates, one of the most expensive law firms in the country. Each lawyer on the letterhead charged over $1,000 an hour. James opened the envelope with shaking hands. The first page was a petition for divorce. The second page was a full financial disclosure of Maya's assets. His eyes went wide as he read. A $50 million trust fund. Investment accounts worth $6.8 million. A 30% equity stake in Blackwell Enterprises worth approximately $1.4 billion. 3 properties in her name. A portfolio of luxury vehicles in storage. Her actual annual salary, $850,000. His wife. His ordinary, worthless, contributed-nothing wife was worth $1.5 billion. James dropped the papers. He picked them up. He read them again. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of sick joke. He Googled Maya Blackwell on his phone. The results loaded. Article after article. Heiress to Blackwell fortune returns to public life. Maya Blackwell, daughter of billionaire Richard Blackwell, spotted at company headquarters. Photos of Maya from years ago, before she'd met James, attending charity galas in designer gowns, speaking at business conferences, cutting ribbons at building openings. "Mom!" James shouted. "Mom!" Dorothy came running. What is it?" James showed her the papers, the articles, the photos. Dorothy's face went from confused to shocked to pale. "This can't be real," she whispered. "She's bluffing." But she wasn't bluffing. The evidence was everywhere. James's phone started buzzing. Text messages flooding in from family members. Someone had posted about it in the family group chat. "Rebecca, guys, look who James married." She'd attached a news article. Maya Blackwell, daughter of billionaire Richard Blackwell, officially takes over West Coast division of Family Empire. The family chat exploded. Aunt Linda, "That's the woman we kicked out?" Uncle Bob, "James, you absolute idiot." Tom, "Bro, you threw out a billionaire?" Rebecca, "Oh God, I recorded us mocking her. I posted it online. It's everywhere. People are tearing us apart in the comments." Cousin Sarah, "My friends are texting me. This is so embarrassing." James sat down heavily. His phone kept buzzing. Notifications from social media. Rebecca's video of the eviction night had gone viral. 5 million views and climbing. The comments were brutal. Imagine throwing out a billionaire and her kids in the rain. The way they all laughed while she packed. Disgusting humans. Those poor babies crying and nobody helped them. Dorothy is literally the worst mother-in-law I've ever seen. I hope Maya takes everything from them. James tried to call Maya. The number was disconnected. He tried to find her on social media. Nothing. No trace. She'd vanished into thin air, or rather, she'd returned to a world so far above him that he couldn't reach it. He called the Blackwell Enterprises main line. A secretary answered. "I need to speak with Maya Blackwell," James said desperately. "Ms. Blackwell is unavailable," the secretary said coolly. "May I ask who's calling?" "Her husband, James Patterson." There was a long pause. "Please hold." James waited, hope flickering. Maybe she'd talk to him. Maybe he could explain. A male voice came on the line. Deep, cultured, powerful. "Mr. Patterson, this is Richard Blackwell." James's mouth went dry. The billionaire himself. "Mr. Blackwell, I just want to talk to Maya. I can explain." "You will not contact my daughter," Richard said, his voice like ice. "You will communicate only through her lawyers. Is that clear?" "But I didn't know." "You didn't know because you never asked. You never looked. You never valued her enough to wonder if there was more to your wife than met the eye." Richard's voice was controlled but lethal. "You threw my daughter and my grandchildren out in the rain like garbage. Now you'll deal with the consequences." The line went dead. James sat in his living room, the divorce papers spread around him, his phone buzzing with increasingly horrified messages from family members, and he finally understood. He'd destroyed his life. He'd thrown away a billionaire heiress. He'd kicked out the mother of his children, and there was no taking it back. Brittany found him like that an hour later. "James? What's wrong? Why are you sitting in the dark?" James looked up at her. Brittany, the woman he'd thrown away his marriage for. The woman who was so driven and so independent and so different from his wife. I didn't marry a nobody, James said slowly. I married one of the richest women in the country. And I threw her away. Brittany's face changed. What? James showed her the papers, the articles. Brittany read them, her expression shifting from shock to calculation to something like disgust. You were married to a billionaire? She said. And you fumbled it? I didn't know. How did you not know? Brittany was backing away from him now, as if his failure was contagious. James, if you were stupid enough to not recognize what you had, what else don't you know? Brittany, please. My face is all over the internet, Brittany said, pulling out her phone. Everyone knows I'm the mistress who helped break up a marriage. My boss just called. They're asking me to take a leave of absence. She looked at James with something like hatred. This is too much drama. I didn't sign up for this. But I love you, James said weakly. You loved the idea of me, Brittany corrected. You loved having someone who made you feel important. But James, if you couldn't see the value in a woman who was literally worth billions, what does that say about your judgment? She walked out, just like that. The woman he'd destroyed his marriage for, the woman he'd chosen over his wife and children, walked out of his life without looking back. James was alone. Dorothy came downstairs, and for once, she looked uncertain. We can fix this, she said. We'll apologize. Maya will understand. She'll take you back. Mom, James said tiredly. She has lawyers that cost more per hour than I make in a week. She's not taking my calls. She's gone. But the grandchildren, we threw them out in the rain, James said flatly, in front of 15 witnesses who were recording it. It's all over the internet. What judge is going to give us access to those kids now? Dorothy sat down, finally understanding the magnitude of what they'd done. The next day, James received another legal notice. Emergency custody hearing. Maya's lawyers had moved with terrifying speed. The hearing was in 3 days. Those 3 days were hell. James was called into his boss's office. This gambling debt, his boss said. Why didn't you report it? It's a security risk. I was handling it. You weren't handling it. You were committing fraud with company expense reports to fund an affair. The boss slid a folder across the desk. We've been investigating. You're terminated. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out. James walked out of his office building with a box of his belongings, no job, no money, and a custody hearing in 2 days. Brittany was also fired from her position, the company citing the internal affair as violation of policy. The family members who had participated in the eviction were facing their own consequences. Tom lost a promotion at his company. Rebecca's friends were distancing themselves. Dorothy was asked to leave her church group. The video haunted them everywhere they went. And then came the custody hearing. James showed up at the courthouse with a public defender he could barely afford. He looked terrible. Hadn't slept, hadn't shaved properly, wearing a wrinkled suit. Then Maya arrived. James barely recognized her. She stepped out of a chauffeured Rolls-Royce, surrounded by a security detail. She wore a designer suit that probably cost more than James made in a month. Her hair was professionally styled. Her makeup was flawless. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd been playing a role for 5 years and had finally returned to herself. Behind her came a team of 4 lawyers, each carrying expensive briefcases, each wearing watches that cost more than a car. And behind them came Richard Blackwell himself, the billionaire patriarch, there to support his daughter. James tried to approach. Maya, please. Security stepped in front of him. Sir, step back. Maya, I just want to talk. Maya didn't even look at him. She walked past like he was invisible, like he was nothing, just like he'd made her feel for 5 years. Dorothy tried to approach. Maya, sweetheart, we can talk about this. One of the security guards held up a hand. Ma'am, step back or we'll have you removed. Those are my grandchildren. Ma'am, you threw them out in the rain. The court will hear about that. Inside the courtroom, the hearing began. Maya's lead attorney stood and presented their case with devastating efficiency. They had video evidence, thanks to Rebecca's recording. They had financial records showing James's gambling debts. They had proof of the affair. They had character witnesses lined up. They had documented every instance of Dorothy's interference. They had everything. James's public defender did his best. But what defense was there? Your Honor, my client loves his children. Maya's attorney responded smoothly. On the night of the eviction, Mr. Patterson watched his 3-year-old children cry in the rain. He did nothing to help. He made no effort to ensure their safety. He prioritized his mistress over his babies. That's not love. That's abandonment. The judge reviewed the evidence. The videos, the financial documents, the witness statements. Then she looked at James. Mr. Patterson, I've been a judge for 20 years. I've seen many custody cases, but I have rarely seen such a clear-cut situation. She shuffled papers. You threw your wife and children out in the rain at 11 p.m. You provided no help. You offered no support. You have massive debts, no job, no stable housing. You were conducting an affair. And you did all of this while your wife was secretly funding your lifestyle. James hung his head. Custody is awarded to Ms. Blackwell. Full physical and legal custody. Mr. Patterson, you will have supervised visitation only. For hours every other Sunday. You will pay child support of $3,000 per month. You will complete parenting classes. You will seek treatment for your gambling addiction. And you will have no contact with Ms. Blackwell except through attorneys. The gavel came down. Dorothy shot to her feet. Your Honor, what about grandparent rights? The judge looked at her coldly. Mrs. Patterson, you threw your grandchildren out in the rain. You filmed it and laughed. You have no rights here. Request denied. Outside the courthouse, media had gathered. News of the case had spread. A billionaire heiress custody battle was too good to ignore. A reporter pushed a microphone toward Maya. Ms. Blackwell, how do you feel about the ruling? Maya looked calm and composed. I feel like justice was served. My children are safe. That's all that matters to me. Any words for your ex-husband? Maya paused. For just a moment, her mask slipped and James could see something in her eyes. Not hatred, not even anger. Just profound disappointment and a kind of sadness for time wasted. I wish him well, she said finally. I hope he finds whatever he was looking for. It just wasn't me. She walked to her car, security surrounding her, lawyers flanking her, her father's hand on her shoulder. She didn't look back. James stood on the courthouse steps, alone. Dorothy was crying beside him, but he barely heard her. All he could see was Maya disappearing into that Rolls-Royce, driving away from him forever, taking his children into a world he could never reach. The final divorce settlement came 2 weeks later. Maya kept all her assets, obviously. James got nothing. The house was sold, and Maya took 70% of the equity as repayment for her contributions. James's 30% went to paying off his debts, and he still owed $80,000. He filed for bankruptcy. Dorothy filed for bankruptcy. The family members who had participated in the eviction tried to apologize to Maya, sending letters and messages. All of them were returned unopened or blocked. Rebecca sent a heartfelt apology. I was wrong. I'm so sorry. Can we talk? Maya's lawyer responded with a single word. No. 6 months passed. Maya stood in her corner office at Blackwell Enterprises, looking out over the city. She'd officially taken over as CEO of the West Coast Division, a position she'd been doing secretly for years, but now held openly. On her desk was a photo of Emma, Olivia, and Noah, laughing in the sunlight at the estate. The triplets were thriving. They attended an exclusive private preschool. They had music lessons and art classes. They had ponies and swimming pools and everything children could want. But more importantly, they had stability. They had a mother who was present and loving. They had a grandfather who doted on them. They had nannies and teachers who cared about them. They still saw James every other Sunday for 4 hours of supervised visitation. The visits were awkward. James would bring small toys he could barely afford. The children were polite but distant. They'd tell him about their new house, their new school, their new life, a life he wasn't part of. Our new house has a pool, Emma had said at the last visit. And horses, Olivia had added. Grandpa Blackwell is teaching me chess, Noah had said proudly. James had tried not to cry. When the visitation ended, he'd watched his children run to Maya, watched them climb into a luxury SUV with a driver, watched them wave briefly before disappearing into a life of privilege and security. He'd taken the bus home, to his mother's tiny apartment where he was living, to his new job at a call center that barely paid enough to cover his child support, to a life that was nothing like what he'd imagined. Maya, meanwhile, was flourishing. She'd thrown herself into her work, into her children, into rebuilding the life she'd put on hold. She attended charity galas and business conferences. She closed deals and expanded the company. She was exactly who she'd always been, but now the world could see it. At one charity event benefiting single mothers, a reporter asked her about her donation. She'd given $5 million. What inspired such generosity? The reporter asked. Maya smiled. I spent 5 years pretending to be someone I wasn't, living small, hiding. Then I was thrown out with my 3 children by people who thought I was worthless. She paused. Now I'm using my resources to help women who are really in that position. Women who don't have a billionaire father to call. Because every woman has value, whether she has money or not. The audience gave her a standing ovation. A year after the eviction, Maya ran into James at a grocery store. It was unexpected, awkward. He was alone, looking tired, pushing a cart with generic brands. She was with her children, who were laughing and asking for favorite snacks. Maya, James said, his voice breaking. She stopped, looked at him. For a moment, neither spoke. Can we talk? He asked. Just for a minute? Maya looked at her children, then back at James. 1 minute. James took a breath. I was wrong. About everything. The way I treated you, the affair, all of it. I took you for granted, and I didn't see what I had until it was gone. He looked down. I'm in therapy now, trying to understand why I was such an idiot. That's good, Maya said neutrally. I'm glad you're working on yourself. I wanted to ask, is there any chance? Could we maybe? No, Maya interrupted gently but firmly. Whatever you're about to ask, the answer is no. I'm not getting back together with you. I'm not even interested in being friends. That part of my life is over. James's face fell. I understand. I just thought. I had to try. I know what you thought, Maya said. But James, I've moved on. I'm happy now. Really happy. And I hope someday you can be happy too. But that happiness doesn't involve me. She could see him struggling, wanting to argue, wanting to convince her. But instead he just nodded. You look good, he said finally. Happy. I am, Maya confirmed. I wish you well, James. I really do. But this is goodbye. She walked away with her children, and this time she felt nothing but peace. No anger, no regret, no what-ifs. Just a quiet satisfaction that she'd made the right choice. That evening, Maya sat on her balcony at the estate, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. Emma, Olivia, and Noah were playing in their room, their laughter floating through the open windows. Her father was downstairs preparing dinner, insisting that even billionaires should know how to cook for their families. Maya thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, standing in the rain, crying, thinking her life was over. She thought about how wrong she'd been. Her life hadn't ended that night. It had finally begun. Her phone buzzed. A text from someone new. His name was Julian, an architect she'd met at a business conference. He was kind, successful, respectful. They'd been seeing each other casually for a few months. Nothing serious yet, but something with potential. Still on for dinner tomorrow? The text read. Maya smiled and typed back. Looking forward to it. She set down her phone and looked out at her life. The estate, the children, the career, the future stretching out before her full of possibilities. She'd been tested in the worst way possible, and she'd emerged stronger, wiser, more herself than ever. They'd said she was nothing without them, but she'd always been something. She'd just forgotten for a while. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's remembering who you are and living your best life. They'd thrown her away thinking she was worthless. And she'd landed exactly where she was supposed to be. Home.